الحمد لله على الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم علمنا ينفعنا وانفعنا وانت زدنا علما انك انت العليم الحكيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل لساني يفقهوا قولي. So alhamdulillah, we've reached page 47 of the book, and our aim today, because we're sorry we're a bit late, I think we're just letting more people join us, but inshallah, the plan as usual is I'll try to go for maybe half an hour, maybe a bit more, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A. So we're on page 47. And I aim to get to page 56 because it's a long chapter, so I don't want to take up too much time. And this one is about the road to using this remedy. So he's talked about the remedy. So just a recap for those who are just joining us, or just a refresh, because it's been a while since we met. We were supposed to meet at some point in November, but we also had lots of obligations that prevented us from meeting in November. So the main issue that Imam al-Buti is addressing this book is why is it that there's so much quote unquote activity? There's so much Islamic activity, or you could use the word activism. We have so many events and conferences and deen intensives and other things going on. We have courses, we have academic institutions, we have uh, all this uh, again activity happening. But why is it that our overall general state doesn't seem to be changing, right? Like all this activity, all this thing, all this effort that we're putting out there, it's not. We haven't rebuilt the Ottoman Empire. We haven't rebuilt anything. We're not top of the world. And again, it hasn't led to anything substantive. Why? So Imam Abulti, what he's addressing in this book is he's talking about, well, it's something inward, right? It's like so yes, people are engaged in dawah. Yes, people are engaged in teaching. Yes, people are engaged in learning the deen. Yes, people are engaged in spreading the faith. That's happening. But what is the internal state of all of this, right? Are the people who are engaged in this activity, are they doing this sincerely for Allah, or are they doing this merely for the sake of worldly ambitions, so for the sake of fame and reputation and wealth and status and so on and so forth? Is there a lot of jealousy and hasad between individuals and organizations going on? So he says, if we don't address this internal problem, and we don't focus on bringing people back to Allah, then all that quote unquote activity or activism isn't going to produce anything, because the success of everything is built on relation to Allah, our relationship with Allah. I think that's one of the things we discussed in the last episode, and that was not long after the fitna in Gaza started. And I think I was mentioning Ustadh that we were talking about how, we were talking about Salah din Layubi, for example, the last man, one of the great people before, who took over Jerusalem. What he stressed the importance of Fajr and Jama'ah. He stressed the importance of the Tahajjud. He said this is where victory comes from, right? That true victory comes from nearness to Allah. So if one flips back to page 41, Imam al-Bulti says, he explains like one paragraph, what is the remedy? The remedy is to remember, my Muslim brother, our true identity in this life, and then the function for which we have been created. And then we need to keep remembering it whenever we forget it, or become heedless of it. And again, what is our true identity? That we are Allah's slaves, and Allah created us. Why? To worship it, to worship Him, right? That's Surah Al-Dhariyat in the 51st chapter, verse 56. I've only created mankind and the jinn except to worship me. When you keep that in focus, then that keeps your intention sincere, and that puts meaning and barakah into the efforts that you're doing. That devotion to Allah, and that love of Allah puts soul, you could say, puts real meaning into the work that you're doing. Otherwise, it's just empty words. It's like the Arabs will say that what reaches the tongue, what comes from the tongue reaches the ear, what comes from the heart reaches the heart, right? Or they'll say that the sigh of a truly bereaved person is more effective than the poems of a hired mourner, right? You hire someone to mourn, they can sing or chant beautiful poetry, but doesn't have effect on anyone, because why? It's not coming from the heart. This person is just hired to mourn. But someone who's truly bereaved, someone who's truly mourning the loss of someone, they just have to sigh or sniffle, and then it has an effect because it's sincere. So Imam al-Buti in this chapter, he jumps into it and he says that the first thing we have to do is we have to come died in the reality of slavehood to Allah alone. And one is not enslaved by wealth or rank or personal objective or any other bait, right? It's slave to Allah, slave to Allah alone. And this is actually discussed in a book we have coming out. There's Pinnacle Papers Volume 6. This is Volume 2, Volume 6 coming out, which is called Min Asrar al-Manhaj al-Rabbani, from some of the secrets of the divine approach. The first chapter in there, because there's 22 chapters talking about wisdoms of rulings, right? There's wisdoms behind why Allah legislates things. But the first thing he talks about in that book, the first chapter, again, it's just 3 pages, is he says, what is the wisdom behind slavery to Allah? He talks about this. What is wisdom behind slavery to Allah? And he explains that you have to have, he says, the nature, or let's say human nature, is that people are always competing, right? And some people are strong, some people are weak. Some people are intelligent, some people are not so intelligent. Some people are wealthy, some people are not wealthy. So if human beings are heedless of the fact that they are Allah's slaves, and then they're just allowed to act as according to that belief, according to that understanding or misunderstanding, so what happens is you end up where some people end up being the slave masters and other people end up being enslaved, right? Because the people who are more powerful or stronger or whatever it is, they end up enslaving the people who are weaker and less powerful. That's just human nature. That's what happens, and that is embodied perfectly. That is embodied perfectly in the story of Fir'aun and the children of Israel, Bani Israel. That's pretty laid out. Fir'aun, where he says in Surah Al-Naziyat, the 79th chapter, verse 24, and I am your Lord Most High. So he's not acknowledging his slave to Allah. But what people forget is that the Bani Israel were the same. The Bani Israel, they themselves did not acknowledge Allah's slavehood. Because, as Imam Ramadan explains, he says that if someone who's powerful says, I'm Allah's slave, and he accepts that he's Allah's slave, he's not going to oppress other people. He says, I'm Allah's slave. I can't be a tyrant. I can't be an oppressor, right? People who are weak, when they say we are Allah's slave, that means they're not going to accept to be someone else's slave, right? As I'm Allah's slave. Why can't I mean like okay, I'm weak, I may be weak, I may be destitute, I may not have certain means, but that doesn't mean I'm just a slave. I'm just going to accept being humiliated. I'm just going to accept being oppressed. I'm Allah's slave. I'm not so and so slave and so and so slave. I'm Allah's slave, right? I have some dignity. So what you learn from the story of Fir'aun, Pharaoh, and the children of Israel is that, or the Bani Israel, is that they also struggled, or they just didn't acknowledge Allah's mastery over them, that they were Allah's slaves. And again, if you read the story, in Surah Al-Baqarah especially, of where Musa alayhi salam leads them out of slavehood, or leads them out of slavery to Fir'aun, what happens? They end up worshiping the golden calf. Right? Where's the slavehood to Allah? Right? Or for example, you'll notice that when they're talking to Musa, they never ever say our Lord. They say tell your Lord, right? Like to tell your Lord, say to your Lord, ask your Lord. That's what they talk to Musa. They never say ask our Lord. It's like as if they don't acknowledge it. You see, but that shows how it's a symbiotic thing. It's not just the fact that the tyrant doesn't acknowledge Allah, that he's Allah's slave. It's also the tyrannized and oppressed. They don't acknowledge that they're Allah's slaves. So both things come together. So when people acknowledge that, and so again, this is the wisdom. This is the wisdom of recognizing that Allah owns you. You're his property, and therefore, and he has rights over you, and he's commanded you to do certain things. So, how do you become endowed with the reality of the slavehood? And he says what this definitely is it's a jihad. It's a jihad, meaning it's a struggle. It's a struggle, right? And he gives the ayat. وَجَاهِدُوا فِي اللَّهِ حَقَّ جِهَادِهِ هُوَ اجْتَبَاكُمْ, right? هُوَ اجْتَبَاكُمْ. Do jihad for Allah with the jihad that's due to him. And that's in Surah Al-Hajj, ayah 78. Then in Surah Al-Ankabut, ayah 69. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُم سُبُلَنَا. As for those who do jihad in our way, we will guide them to our paths. This is a distinguishing factor between the believer who is sincere in his faith and the hypocrite who adorns himself with the appearance of religiosity and faith. Right? We have to struggle and strive to have that sincerity towards Allah and the sincerity towards His creation. And therefore, you're the slave of Allah. You're not the slave of anything else, because that's the nature of it, right? Because he says on the next page, he quotes the hadith where the Messenger of Allah said, "Wretched is the slave of the dirham, wretched is the slave of the dinar, wretched is the slave of velvet. He's wretched and degenerate." Meaning, if you don't acknowledge you're slave to Allah, you're going to be the slave of something else. You're going to be the slave of something else. It's like Imam al-Buti said, it's like in the book Al-Hub fil Quran, he says that like your heart is like a mirror, right? It'll just show what's put in front of it, right? If your heart is filled with the love of Allah, it won't be filled with something else. But if your heart is devoid of the love of Allah and sincerity towards Allah, it will be filled with the love of something else. It will be filled with the devotion to something else, right? There's always something in front of the mirror, right? You take yourself away from the mirror. The mirror's going to show something else. A mirror never shows nothing. It shows it shows what's put in front of it. So he talks about the nature of. He goes on to talk about how the people of the first generations, right? These are the Sahaba and the Tabi'in, Atba'in, like they embarked upon the jihad of the soul, right? This is the first thing, right? The jihad of the soul, like working what they call mujahid. This also referred to Hadith in Bukhari, in Imam Bukhari's collection, where the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to a gathering, he said that you've come. Some people came back from battle. He said, "Wajahtum min jihad al-asghar, the jihad al-akbar." Right? You came back from the Kama qala sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said you came back from the lesser jihad or the smaller jihad to the bigger jihad. It's the bigger jihad, and that's the jihad that's inward. The jihad that's inward, because again, as a theme that you see Imam Ramadan keep stressing is that it's the inward enemies that you have to defeat. It's the inward enemies you have to defeat. If you can't defeat the inward enemies, then forget it with the outward enemies. You have to prioritize. It's the inward enemies. You have to be able to defeat the inward passions and desires and wins and so forth. And then you'll have a chance with the outward enemy. So he says, what we want to do is we want to look at the first generations and look at how they rectified themselves and how they protected themselves from becoming the slaves of something else other than Allah. And he effectively lays out 4 ways of doing this. 4 ways of doing this. We're going to aim to cover 2 of these in today's session. So the first thing he says is, man must contemplate his essence and his final destination, that Allah is watching him, and he must become aware of it again every time he becomes heedless or forgets. Right? So there has to be a constant reminding of oneself. And he says here, thinking is the activity of the intellect, right? So you have to keep your brain on, so to speak, not thinking about all kinds of things that disturb you and worry you and become stressed and anxious. No, but just to keep reminding and reflecting, and always trying to see Allah moving in your life, right? This is one of the things I've mentioned before in previous sessions, and it goes back to that khutbah a couple of years ago by Sheikh Yusuf Gabr, where he talked about this. He talked about the uh, during the COVID lockdowns. He said, look what's happened. Allah has shut down the pubs, right? Allah has shut down the brothels. Allah has shut down all these places. You have to see Allah is working, and that's why he quoted that story of Imam Abu Hassan al-Shadli, where he said, where he was making dua to Allah, and he was asking Allah for a fetah, and then Allah inspired him, right? He heard a voice, and the voice said to him, "Alaykum an takun abdan shakura." Right? You have to be a grateful slave. And it's like, well, how do I be a grateful slave? He said, well, you have to see yourself as al-mu'nam al-wahid fil qawn. You have to see yourself as the only blessed person in the universe. Right? And Shaykh Yusuf Gabr explains, he says, that means that you have to see that everything Allah is doing, everything that's happening in the world, that's Allah doing things, and Allah is doing what? Allah is trying to bring you closer to Him. Allah is trying to bring you closer to Him. That's what's happening. That's why Allah caused this tribulation to happen, right? And it could be something that you think as small, that's local, it's just happening to you. But it's also, you also have to see it that way regards to the bigger things, like if it's a war or a pandemic or whatever it is. Allah is trying to bring you closer to Him, right? And that's why Abu Hassan Shadli, he says, how can I see myself as blessed, as the only blessed person in the universe, when you've sent prophets and you've sent messengers, and they have a rank with you, and they speak to you, and they've received revelation from you. And the response was, I only send them for you. I only send them for your sake. Right? So you have to, again, it's seeing Allah working in your life, but not just in your life, so to speak, but it's like everything in the universe, Allah's working towards towards you and trying to guide you, and you have to keep that in mind. So he says, and he quotes certain ayat where Allah says, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَفَكَّرُونَ, perhaps you will reflect, right? In Surah Al-Baqarah in ayat 219 and 266, or in Surah Al-Ra'd, ayat 3, إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. There are signs in that for people who reflect, right? You have to. So he says the Prophet ﷺ, he was a preacher and a mujahid, but he was always thinking and reflecting, and that means drawing the connection and seeing how Allah acts. Seeing it's not just you're not seeing merely the material means in front of you, right? You're not seeing it as, oh well, so and so gave me a job, or so and so helped me find a car, or so and so got me a promotion, or so and so helped me cross the street, or so and so helped me with my shop, or whatever it is. You're saying, no, Allah did that. Allah helped me. Allah provided for me. Allah sent so and so. Allah used so and so. Allah got me to this situation. And then Allah did this to me. And then Allah did that to me. Right? Everything you start seeing the entire creation that simply they're simply means. They're simply means. It's Allah who's doing everything. Allah's doing everything, right? You can't see him, but Allah's doing everything. So, and this is why the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would contemplate for a long time in the cave of Hira. And so what he goes on to suggest here is he says that you should have time where you just reflect and think, right? You should be able to take time out of your busy schedule to just think and ponder and reflect on Allah, on Allah and on the creation. And he says, for example, he says here that there are various channels by which the human soul can be given motives and suggestions and so forth. And he says one of them is the intellect and pure logic. Another is the passions and desires that are concentrated in the human constitution. Another is the reactions to feelings of inferiority or motives of arrogance or the sway of tribalism. Another is the knots created by malice and rancor and competing for the scraps of this worldly life and its false ornaments. But then he says, but the key one is intellect and pure logic. Intellect and pure logic is when you can be alone, right? When you can be alone and think and just reflect and not be influenced by anything else. That's when you can think clearly, and then you can go back to Allah. So, I remember Dr. Shadi raised this when we did a podcast several months back. He raised this point. He said that, like, for example, the nafs, like the importance of being alone, for example, the nafs loves competition, right? That's the part about the nafs. Then your nafs, that ego, it loves competition, right? So that's why it's very, very healthy to get away from people. When you get away from people, you stop comparing yourself to other people. You start saying, "Oh, I'm better than so and so," or "I need to be like so and so." Right? You move away from that, and when you're alone, and it's just you and Allah, then you can think clearly, right? Arrogance, envy, all these other diseases, all these other whims and passions, they can't affect you because now you're alone. So what he says is important. If you don't do it for, like, say, a long period of time, like some other man, like the great Sufis do, like long-term khalwa, just to have a time every day where you're just alone, right? Whether it's after Fajr, whether it's before Isha, whether it's sometime middle of the day, maybe it's the middle of the night, maybe it's the Hajj time, but to make some time where it's just you and Allah, like that for you to have that time, not just for dua and dhikr, but just to contemplate and think about Allah and what Allah is doing with you in your life, and how He's the one making everything happen. Like I said before, He's not letting things happen, as some people believe. No, He's making everything happen. So that's what he goes on to say. He says, this is achieved by way of regular hours of solitude or isolation. Man should set aside some time in which his intellect can be independent and free, and he can ask about his final outcome and about the reality of all this tumult, all this din that's happening all around him. And when he does so, he should seek succor by remembering Allah the Exalted's words and his profound admonitions, as well as the words of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his sublime guidance. And he says, by telling you this, I'm not telling you to isolate yourself from the community and to live far away in some mountain caves in the depths of some valley, right? We're not preaching monasticism here, right? This again, Surah Al-Hadid, 50th chapter, I think it's verse 26. Allah says, "Ruhbaniya ibtada'uha," right? It says the Christians, they invented monasticism. That's not what we advocate, right? You live in the world, but you're not of the world, right? So don't run off to some mountain range or to the desert. No, live in the world, but you're not of the world. and try it again. Whatever your circumstances are, try to find that time in the day to just be alone, and to reflect and to think and to ponder. Um, and be in a situation where your thoughts will not be infiltrated by anything else. And on top of that, also try to find gatherings of the righteous, right? Try to be in the presence of righteous people. So if you're not alone, the company you keep, try to be in the company of people who inspire you, people who lift you, people who remind you of Allah, right? There's a hadith that's it's daif, but it's seen as sahih ma'na. خيركم من رؤيا ذكر الله, right? The best of you are those when they're seen, Allah is remembered, right? You want to be in good company like that. So that's the first one. He says the first way to address this is, he says, is to have this contemplation. This is the first means, is to have this contemplation, to set time aside, right? Because again, it can be very, very uh, what's the word? It can leave you feeling very, very empty. I don't know if you've ever had the experience sometimes in a day where maybe you've had like a busy working day. I'm sure maybe Ustadh that you can tell me this, where you've had a busy work day and you've been with people all day long. Have you ever had that experience where you realize that you actually haven't been alone for a moment for like maybe 8 hours or 10 hours? It can get to you. And you start thinking, SubhanAllah, I just want just a few minutes alone, just to, like, I don't know, read a surah of the Quran, or do my daily adhkar, or do some. It's just, when you're with people like constantly, you're always in a conversation, you're always in a meeting, you're always in something, you're always in some sort of social context, or professional context, or working context. It gets really exhausting. Like, I just need this just a few minutes by myself. That's all I need. That's all I need. You can comment on that later, Ustadh Validi. Talk Luffy. And then the second one he mentions, and I won't go into a lot of detail. The second one he mentions again is having a regular wird, right? A regular wird, meaning a daily practice that you have, right? Where you have certain adhkar that you read every day. You have certain, meaning you have certain du'as. There's certain remembrances. There are certain portions of the Quran that you read every day. So maybe you say to yourself, okay, I read Yasin every morning, Sot Yasin every morning, the 36th chapter. I read Al-Waqiya in the evening. I read Sot Al-Mulk. I read Sot Al-Sajda. I read Sot Al-Kahf on Fridays, uh, maybe twice, according to the position of Imam Shafi and Imam Nawawi. Um, and then on top of that, you might have salawat on the Prophet ﷺ. Maybe you read Dalal al-Khairat. Maybe you read like a daily portion of that. But this is really, really important that you have this, and it's especially good to have that maybe in the morning, or maybe in the evening, right? You might use, or both, right? You might have something that you read like when you wake up in the morning, or maybe like after you pray Fajr, or before Fajr, and then one maybe in the evening, maybe after Isha, or maybe just before when you get into bed, before you fall asleep. You have awrad that you read, right? And there are hadith about this. There are hadith about this, like where the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned that these are things that that whoever says this when he wakes in the morning, whoever says this when he goes to bed at night, has such and such reward. So he says that he said, Imam al-Buti says, a harsh heart is only softened, right? It's often the case that a harsh or hard heart is only softened by the recitation of Allah's book, right? So some people, again, they don't make time for this. They don't make time in their day to read any portion of the Quran, or even a translation. But like, make time, make time to read Allah's book, and it will soften you, inshallah. So he says all the companions had a specific wird that consisted of reading a portion of the Quran every day and night. Maybe an emergency would prevent one of them from completing his wird on a given day, so he'd make it up the following day, right? And this happened to Umar al-Khattab, right? Like he'd miss it, but then he'd make it up the next day, right? Because I have, they had their set portions that they would recite every day. And he says on the following page, he says, based on the above, and he quotes several ayats about remembering Allah in the morning and the evening. He says the scholars have made consensus that the Muslim must have a regular wird consisting of glorification, right? So saying Subhanallah, seeking forgiveness, saying Astaghfirullah, right? So you can say like Astaghfirullah al-Azim, la ilaha illallah al-Hayyul Qayyum. Like you can say that 100 times a day, or in the morning, the evening, whatever it is, and recitation of the Quran. And then the best time for that is in the early morning and the evening, right? So when you're not working, or not necessarily with family, when you're not necessarily tending to whether it's your job, whether it's housework, you're just in the morning when everyone's praying and doing their own worship, or in the evening everyone's gone to bed, right? Like if you have kids, your kids have gone to sleep, right? You're not tending to them anymore. You can sit down and do something. So it says, and he says, if anything prevents you from doing your weird at its normal time, it is best to make it up afterwards at any time of the day or night, so that your being preoccupied from it does not lead to you neglecting it and being deprived of it. Right? Like you want to get back on it. You don't want to get into the habit of where you're doing like less and less and less, and then you stop doing it altogether. And then he says as well, uh, yeah, because the Messenger of Allah says in Hadith, it says if someone oversleeps and misses his right, he misses like his portion of the Quran that he likes to read every day, or a part of it, let him recite it between dawn and the noon prayer, i.e. the next day, between Fajr and Dhuhr the next day, and it will be written for him as if he recited it at night. Right? It's like you can actually do qada of this. You can do like a makeup of this. And he says, then he goes on to say, do not listen to anyone. Right? There's certain people who have issues with adhkar and dhikr, and they say, don't do it. It's a bid'ah. Don't do it at appointed times. And he says, ignore these people. These people, because we have these hadith or Messenger of Allah Sallallahu is telling us, and the scholars have told us to do this every day. He says, we have these other people at those same times, in Fajr or before bedtime, they're doing other things. They're watching TV, they're playing video games, they're socializing. So who are they to tell us how to be good Muslims? Who are they to tell us this, right? So no, set aside that time, and this is yeah. Um, and then he says, you should know that the effect of both reciting the Quran and remembering all the exalted is sublime in treating the maladies and illnesses of the soul. By persevering in both, the feeling of being watched by Allah takes form in the heart, that you are being watched in all of your actions. Like Allah is watching you, all of your actions, intentions, and conduct. If it ever occurs to you to do something or even intend something unlawful, this feeling will repel it, so that your actions are set right and your intention is corrected. This is the greatest divine protection of Muslim's life. It is the ahsan that Messenger of Allah described when he said that the Muslim worships his Lord as though he can see him, and even though he cannot actually see him, he is certain that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can see him. And he goes on to explain here that this is the dhikr not just of the tongue but of the heart. Right? The tongue assists the heart, but it has to be the remembrance of the heart first and foremost. And he says, and as a final closing point, he says, if there's a barrier between the tongue and the heart, such that the tongue is fervently engaged in remembrance, supplication, and glorification, while the heart is immersed in this worldly life and its unlawful desires and ambitions, such a person is not one who remembers Allah or is devoted to it. Rather, he shows people only the appearance of being someone who remembers Allah. And the only benefit he derives from that is that it places him among them. Right? Like he's like people see him as someone who remembers Allah, but he's not really someone who remembers Allah. So we ask Allah to make us of those people who remember Allah with the hearts and not just the tongues, and that He cure us and rid us and protect us from these inward illnesses and diseases. Well, alhamdulillah, I'll finish there, inshallah. And then we'll start with page 56.3 next time, inshallah. Hand over to you, Jalaluddin.
Barakallahu fikum, Ustaz Mahdi. Thank you for your explanation and lecture and sharing of the pages that we've covered tonight. So let us open the floodgates for questions, or if you have anything you want to discuss, you want to give some information, or you want to point out certain things, tafaddal, you can type it in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask your question, inshallah. Tafaddal.
Let's see if you have to do your sunnah and start first.
No, I think Brother Zulkifli has been able to cover me on that, inshallah.
Hope he hasn't said anything yet.
Yeah.
Yes, Sheikh.
Alhamdulillah, he's here. He's here. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. MashaAllah.
It's wonderful for missing last month's class. Yeah, I as I was reading the the chapter and listening to you explain as well. It's remarkable that the fact that anything that happens within to Muslim, whether to his family, his surrounding, or to anything that happens in the world, that he's told to reflect upon himself and then improve himself, and somehow or other this will have an effect of the goodness or the change that he wants on his in his life and the community, and then that kind of transcends up to a global level. You know,
Mm.
recently one of the Habai mentioned as well about with regard to whatever is happening over in Gaza and all that, in things with regard to trying to boycott, products and what have you not. We need to kind of reflect on ourselves as well, in terms of boycotting those values that were harmful and all that, and kind of revert back to the
Mm.
to the akhlaq and all that. So just just want to hear your thoughts, with regard to this. How everything kind of goes back to the person and how he needs to kind of renew and kind of reflect back on himself with regard to anything that's happening, be it in his family, his surrounding, or
Mm.
to anything else. Yeah. So,
Okay, inshallah. Okay. Yes, Alhamdulillah, Mr. Rasulullah. So yes, it's a very good point. It's a very good point. And it all ties in. Um, and you mentioned the boycott. See the boycotts can have some effect, and there's some benefit. I saw the news this morning that Starbucks in Morocco has shut down. They've gone bankrupt. That's one. And don't worry, Moroccans will be fine. They have plenty of cafes, and they have better cafes. I lived there for years. They'll be fine. But put it this way, because I think one of the things that people have, and this again ties in directly with what we're talking about with this book, Inward Sin, is and the temptation. So it's because again, a lot of people have been asking this question about, okay, well, what about all the Muslim rulers, right? Like how come all these governments and all these various Muslim governments and these presidents and kings, whoever they are, how come they haven't done anything, right? How come they haven't sent in their armies? How come they haven't done anything to help people of Gaza? And then you dig deeper and you realize, well, again, a lot of them have peace treaties with Israel. A lot of them have trade deals with Israel. But there are things going on. Okay, well, why does that happen though? Right? Why are these rulers? Why are these people in these compromised positions? Well, it goes back to what we were just talking about. These people have fallen in love with dunya, right? They're fallen in love with dunya. They've fallen in love with wealth and with power and with status, and therefore they're compromised, and therefore they don't want to do anything that would jeopardize the wealth and the power and the status that they have. And this is not something new. This is not something new. This is not like unique to our age, right? Like people forget, and then there's people nowadays who say like, oh, if there was a khilafah, this wouldn't happen. Dude, there was a khilafah when the Crusades happened. There was a khilafah when the Crusades happened, right? The Abbasids were there. They just were doing what the guys nowadays are doing. Nothing. It's right. Like people forget, like Saladin Layubi, Nuruddin Zengi, they weren't the emir overall, right? They had emirs, they were emirs of certain areas, but they were not neither of them were the Khalifa. But they took it upon themselves to say, well, we have to do something, right? We're the emir of this area, we have to do something. So to bring it all together, again, that key ayah, Surah Al-Ra'd, ayah 11, 13th chapter, verse 11, Inna Allah la yughayru ma biqawmin hatta yughayru ma binfusihim. Allah doesn't change what is in the people until they change what's in themselves. We have to really think about why these things are happening, how we can rectify ourselves better ourselves. Because again, I mean, we look at we look at some of our rulers, especially the ones in the Muslim world, and this again will apply more to people who live in the Muslim world. Again, the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said, "An-nas ala dini mulukihim," right? The people are on the deen of their kings and their rulers, right? He also said in the Sahih Jami of Imam Suyuti, "Kaman takunu yuwalla alaykum," as you are, you will be ruled over, right? So people complain about King so and so or President so and so. Well, where did he come from, right? He didn't pass through a membrane from another dimension. He's one of you, right? He's one of you. He simply reflects what the people under him are about. Um, so inshallah, that this is waking people up. And to go back to this boycott thing, I mean that's a good thing. That's a good thing, right? Starbucks shutting down in Morocco. It's probably going to shut down in other countries. Because I know people who live in Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries. They say like Starbucks is like empty, right? No one's going there. But and people are boycotting Coca-Cola. People are boycotting other things, McDonald's. My question all along has been ever since people first raised issues to me about boycotts 20 years ago. My question has always been, why are you eating that stuff in the first place? I mean, it's junk. It's literally called junk food. It's trash. There's no nutritional benefit in McDonald's or in Coke or this stuff is trash. Like you, if again, if you see yourself as a slave of Allah, and you understand that Allah created you only to worship Him. I quoted earlier, Surah Al-Thariyat 56. And then you understand that your body is nothing but an instrument of worship. That's why Allah gave it to you. It's not yours. It's His. He owns your body. He gave it to you so that you could worship Him. And therefore, you are obligated to take care of it. You're obligated to maintain it. You're obligated to put good food inside of it. You're obligated to give it the rest that it needs, to give it the exercise that it needs, and to take care of it. If you put all that in place first, why would you even think about drinking Coke and eating McDonald's food, right? I mean, I don't know if people remember this. This was 20 years ago. There was a book, and I used to tell this because I remember I was living in Morocco and people introduced when I was living in Morocco the second time around 15 years ago. McDonald's had just come to Morocco, and some Moroccans were swayed like, "Ooh, it's an American, it's McDonald's," right? And students would tell me like, "Oh, teacher, we're doing McDonald's for lunch." So I would just tell them straight up what I read. Um, a man called Eric Schlosser, he wrote a book called Fast Food Nation. This book came out in 2003. I don't know if anyone's ever seen this book, but he studied like what is the fast food industry? Where do they get their meat from? And he went to meat packing factories and the slaughterhouses in the southern United States, in places like Colorado. It's over on the Mexican border. And and he said this mass production of beef patties for like McDonald's and Burger King and so forth. He said horrific things happen there. Horrific things happen there. Right. So much so he said like the conclusion is that because again they don't starve the animals properly, they don't cleanse them properly, they move everything in. And he said a lot of the people who work there are like Mexican immigrants or like well they're not even legal immigrants, they're legal aliens. They don't speak English, they don't know how to operate the machines properly. Sometimes he says like a finger gets chopped off and it goes in to the machine, gets processed, a leg gets chopped off. One time an entire Mexican got sucked in, get sent off. And he said the conclusion of his study, he said that when you get like a normal beef patty from McDonald's, right, or one of these other places, there's probably meat in there from 100 different animals and some feces, right? So I'm sorry to go off on that kind of tangent, but you start thinking about the deeper problems of like you shouldn't be eating that stuff anyway. That's my point. It's not healthy for you. But inshallah, I think again, people will start seeing when you work on yourself and you go back to the slave of Allah, that does have an effect on your family, has an effect on your community. And that's not necessarily like a supernatural effect. That's not a supernatural effect, right? One of the things Imam Ramadan talked about, especially in his book Civilization, right? The civilization of the Quran, is he says that one of the things we lack amongst Muslims a lot is trust, right? We lack a lot of trust. He said, we have a lot of brilliant people in the Ummah who have a lot of brilliant ideas, a lot of brilliant business ideas, but then they can't find financial backers, they can't find investors because there's a lack of trust. Well, how do you build trust? Well, you build trust through character, right? People have to have good character. When people have good character with one another, they're good to one another. They show politeness and kindness to one another, and it's not just superficial and fake, but it's actually real. That builds trust, and then people are able to accept. Okay, I can work with so and so, and I can accept so and so. I can work within a hierarchy. I can be part of a project, and I can accept that so and so is the emir, and so is the treasurer, and so this. You can accept those kinds of things. So it's not just a purely supernatural thing. It's just a very practical thing. Is that good character breeds trust, and trust breeds success. Trust breeds the ability for people to actually work together and be content with having different people in different positions, right? And people don't have like ego issues. Think, well, I don't trust that guy. I don't know if I want him to be in that position. I don't know if I want him to that guy to handle the money. I don't know if I want that guy to be in charge, right? So it does practical effect. So inshallah, that's the result of us working on ourselves and showing good character to our fellow Muslims, especially. And that's what builds unity, that builds trust, and that ultimately builds success, inshallah. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah,
So you get quiet.
I'm just reflecting on the amount of junk food I've been having over a couple of years.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
We cannot blame ourselves. We were brainwashed by all the advertisements and all the good memories that we have.
Yeah,
It was implanted in us.
Yeah, you see, when it comes to celebrity endorsements, stick to Cristiano Ronaldo, right? He just has water, right? Ignore Messi. He promotes beer, Coke, everything. No, stick to agua. Okay. Question from Sufi: what if we did some mistakes at work during our class and said, "Is it considered a tradition from law? If so, how can we explain this concept or non-Muslim call it?" Um, that's an interesting one. Okay, if you're talking about work, um, in the work concept, I don't know if you mean by mistakes or if you mean like maybe your company suffered something, your company suffered some losses. Um, I'll put it to you this way. There are people who are not Muslim, right? They're not Muslim, but they understand the concept of the more you give, the more you give, the more you get, and the more you take, the more you shrink, right? So they even they understand, even though it sounds like a purely business thing, they understand that you have to, for example, like your company, you have to give like free value. Even they understand that concept. You have to give free value. You have to put effort into things, right? Now, they're saying they're thinking from a purely business sense, like pure business. Like I need to put out free content or free material or um, give people something meaningful, and then they'll like my company, they'll like my product, right? So they understand that in the purely bare business sense. For us, we would take that further and say, no, like you do things because you genuinely care about people, right? You want to genuinely care about people. So yes, you have your business, right? So whatever it is, whether you're selling food, whether you're selling clothes, whether you're selling high tech stuff, whether you're offering classes or courses, whatever it is, but your prime intention, what you wants to be that, or should be that you're trying to help people and benefit people, right? That's the oral intention, and that's where the success that involve a law lies, right? That's why a lot of doctors are like that. Like they're doctors because they think, I want to help people. I like to see people I like to see people recover from illnesses and recover from injuries. I enjoy that, right? And they don't care. The money is secondary. The money is secondary. That's what people. A lot of people are shocked now when they look at the situation with like doctors in Gaza. Like they don't leave. Like who's paying them? Right? And they're offered safe passage. They're offered safe passage. They said, listen, you some of them have like other passports. They have British passports or Russian passports. They can go somewhere. They're like, no, I can't leave. I can't leave my patients. There's a doctor at Shifa Hospital who, uh, the Israelis like demanded that he leave the hospital. He's like, I can't leave my patients. Right? If I leave, they die. If you're going to if you're going to kill them, kill me too. That's how they feel about their profession. That's how they feel about what they're doing. It's serious. So so I would say, like, if you're dealing with your colleagues who are not Muslims, is just remember that the key to success is to keep putting in that sincere hard work and not to forget where the success comes from. You don't want to become complacent. You don't want to become complacent. Like again, and this is something that I don't think people who are not Muslim, I don't think they struggle to understand this, because there's a saying in English called I think the Americans have this. They say living off the name, right? This expression called living off the name. Living off the name is where this refers to like a corporation that's so big, has become so big, and it's become so successful that just stops trying. And then they say, okay, well, we don't have to try because we're this big name, right? We're Coca-Cola, we're FedEx, we're Nike, we're whatever we are. And who cares if we cut corners here and there, right? I think FedEx had this issue for a while, Federal Express. Like they built up a big name for being like, very, very high speed delivery service, right? But then they got a lot of trouble because people started realizing that they were just like chucking packages over fences, right? I mean, you've seen videos of a guy like he's dropping off like a 32-inch plasma TV and he's just throwing over the fence. Right? It's like it's living off the name. That's not the service that people are paying for. People are paying for the stuff to be delivered intact, right? At high speed. So I think that's what you'd have to say that again, if you don't put in the right effort into the job you're doing, and you put in the right ihsan, because again, there's another thing we talk about, ihsan. We should talk about ihsan, like putting ihsan and itqan, like putting proficiency and excellency into your work. That pays off, right? If you cut corners and you're insincere with people and you don't do things properly, you suffer. And yes, you can see that as a tribulation from Allah, but that's just a natural consequence of things, right? If you cut corners, it does catch up with you, and then customers are not happy, shareholders are not happy, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's how I would explain it to people who are not Muslim. I hope that answers your question, Sufi. If not, please let me know. Is there anything else?
Anyone else want to ask any question?
No. Might be your turn, Ustaz Jalaluddin. Might be your turn.
uh, Fortunately, tonight I don't have anything to add, inshallah.
Okay, subhanallah. I was gonna ask you something actually.
Okay.
No, nothing. Not too serious. Because we didn't get a chance to meet in November, should we meet later this month? What do you think for the next session?
If it's this fun, told me that day that you're suggesting, is it 25th December?
Yeah. Christmas Day.
Yeah, I think it's possible. I'll update you on that, because I'm not sure with other Singaporeans, because it's a long holiday. So sometimes Singaporeans they will go like overseas for like a short getaway, things like that. Because but
All right.
I
Well,
think tentatively we can still proceed with 25th, inshallah.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll set it as like a fixed date or a provisional date. What do you think?
I think we set it as a fixed date, and then I'll post it at our group, and then depending on the number of people that I think likes it or put thumbs up, then we'll know, we have a gauge of how many people will be attending, inshallah. Yeah.
If you get a massive Instagram rebellion, no, you can't do it. Okay, that's fine. All right. then we'll look at changing it. But khalas, inshallah khair. But yeah, but I think in terms of other announcements to make, I think we can announce that inshallah the Pinnacle Paper 6.
Yep.
That's coming, inshallah. We just need that forward from Sheikh Tawfiq.
Hopefully we can get it ready and get it printed by December this month, inshallah. That means this will be the last publication for this year. Yeah,
inshallah. And then we'll do that book on Quds, inshallah.
Inshallah. That's something that we'll update sooner, inshallah. And soon, inshallah, we'll update the supporters and followers on Instagram and everywhere else, inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah. We're keeping it low. Only you people know right now. Keep it low. But inshallah, yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent, alhamdulillah. Yeah. So fine. So if there are no more questions or comments or anything, inshallah, we'll wrap up. Inshallah,
Yep.
I'll
Yeah.
let you finish then. Ustaz Jadin, I'll let you close it.
Okay, thank you everyone. Good night to all of you. Let us close our session tonight with Tasbih Kafara and Suratul Asr. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika asyhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wal 'asri innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilus solihati wa tawassaw bil haqqi wa tawassaw bis sabr. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sallam walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Tusbihu ala khair. Good night everyone and good afternoon to you, Sidi Mahdi, Ustaz Mahdi, inshallah.
Sure. Oh, yeah, barakallahu feek. Barakallahu feek. Salam wa barakatuh.
Wassalamu alaikum.